morning, everybody. Thank you, Susan, for that very flattering introduction. I'm here, thank you. I want to, again, it's interesting because Margaret's talk just now, very interesting, I think just hit on many of the points I want to raise, but I want to start at the very end, and she talked about the need for research. And possibly that's one of the reasons I'm here, is to talk about a particular project that we have just started in relation to the representation of female politicians in the media. But before I do that, I just want to introduce, I'm going to just talk in general, really, about the kinds of research that has been done in relation to the representation of women and in relation to specifically, I suppose, some work I've done maybe in the past in an Irish context. But more particularly, and so it's kind of an overview really of the kinds of research, echoing again, I think, many of the things that were raised by Margaret in her talk. But I want to just introduce you, if you don't mind, initially to the person in this room who is Basha Pieta, who is the researcher on our current project and who probably knows a lot more at this stage about the current, if you like, the state of the art in terms of research on the representation of women. So really, again, so you can, if there are questions, as it were, later, you might want to, that I can't answer, you might want to approach Basha to discuss with her. I suppose there's just a number of basic kind of key points that I would like to make. One is the importance of media, at least the increasing importance of media in terms of everyday life. And, you know, again, it's quite obvious, but I think it needs to be kind of reiterated. The fact that media now are so influential in everybody's lives because they are so embedded. There's such a diversity of media. We are constant, it's not now just the 9 o'clock television news. We are Twittering, we are blogging, we have our mobile phones and so on. So it's almost like, you know, that it's now become part of our body, as it were, the mobile body. So that, I think, you know, therefore, it really is very important in terms of influencing how we see the world. And you know, so therefore, and it's interesting to look at the kinds of research that have been done on women in the media, going back to really the kind of second wave feminism of the 1970s. And one of the first women was an American called Gay Tubman, and she talked about what she calls the symbolic annihilation of women by the media. So, I mean, she just pinpointed something again that was quite obvious, but she did, you know, very detailed systematic studies showing that on television, in newspapers, in print, again, the same kind of stuff, that women were underrepresented. They were objectified, they were portrayed in terms of sex role stereotyping, and they were trivialized. So that, you know, that's one of the first kinds of studies. And again, a lot of the stuff of the research coming from the US from the 1970s about again, I'm thinking of Dallas Smythe's work, looking at the representation of women on primetime television. Again, the same kinds of results, the same kinds of findings. Women were much less frequently represented. But when they were represented in roles that were very much traditional, conventional stereotyping of women, in roles that were less powerful. And I think if you look at, you know, even looking from the 1970s to now, you would find exactly the same kinds of, the same findings. And we'll talk a little in a minute about the representation of women politicians. Again, the notion that they are represented in ways which actually emphasize either their appearance, their age, or indeed their family roles, and very often their parenting roles and their maternal roles. So again, really I would say that, you know, very little has changed in a way. Now I want to just concentrate, because there's so much research on representations of women in, again, there is the global study that people here may be very interested in. It's called the Global Media Monitoring Project. And it looks every 5 years, I think, gosh, you will remember this, at both women working in media, but also how women are represented in media. And their most recent, and again it's interesting, their most recent findings or analysis and report from 2010, what they do is they take a day, I think it was the 10th of February in 2010, and they have teams of researchers in a number of countries, really globally, to look at what's happening. And the findings for the last report are that women appeared, if you're looking at news coverage, in 24% of actuality programming and print media and news coverage. 24% were women, representing women. So that leaves, if anyone can do the maths on that, of the majority representation of men. And of the kinds of media in which women appeared, only 18% were representing women in relation to or in the context of politics and governments. So again, very low representation. Again, of the news items in which women did appear, it's interesting that they were featured as experts or spokespeople only in 1/5 of their overall representation. So it's interesting to see this, and also 38%, I mean half of the news items, they were represented as vox pop. So really the point I'm making here is, even though we may see an increase in the representation of women, we actually have to ask questions about then the more qualitative aspects of that. How are women being represented? In what kinds of contexts? In what kinds of roles? And so on. So that's, I think, a very important question. Because if you look at the overall findings for the Global Media Monitoring Project, you would find that there actually has been an increase in the representation of women. And in 1995, for instance, women were represented in 17%, or at least the 17%, of news, actuality coverage in print and broadcast media. And that had increased to 21% in 2005. So 2010 it's gone up to 24%. So the point I'm making is, while we really do want an increase in representation, we have to be very careful about what that representation means. And again, and I haven't timed myself,
you've got 1 minute.
Just in 1 minute, okay. Okay, so I'll make it very short. That some of the more recent studies would suggest that while the very kind of crude, blatant sex role stereotyping has decreased, that there are other more subtle gendered ways of representing women that actually can be equally detrimental. And there's a number of studies, for instance, if you look at how, and again I'm referring here to women politicians, how they're framed, and again, interesting kinds of echoes earlier, that they're represented in women as outside. In fact, that is called gendered mediation. The idea that politics really is conventionally associated with men, and any women who enter politics, therefore, are in some way outliers. So, some of the frames used will be, women as outsiders, women as, agents of change. For instance, the idea that, oh, now women are going to change everything, which of course the expectations are much too high there. Of course, they're not going to change everything. Or indeed, women as, now a leadership breakthrough. Things, people like Angela Merkel and so on. So again, what, I'm saying that, what we need to do is look at the frequency of representation of women, but more importantly, the different ways in which they are represented, and if those are going to